Bokrijk, a realm full of experiences, reenacting the past, reviving old crafts due to our desire for craftsmanship, traditional games away from the computer and mobile screens. A circus, not exactly Cirque du Soleil, but the children love it. Does the Bokrijk Museum have any significance other than a day out with the family? The authorities invested in a meaningful museum, not in a theme park. What were the ideas of the pioneers at the time? Does their vision still resonate today? How does a grey past become meaningful and colourful for all today in a globalized world in the digital age of virtual reality, artificial intelligence and space travel? In Bokrijk you get to see dwellings which come from all over Flanders. They were transferred to the museum in pseudo-historic regional settlements. But where did the idea of deconstructing and reconstructing houses of farms, including their interior in a museum, come from? This takes us to the Nordics around the year 1900. In these countries, threatened historical farms and rural traditions, considered symbols of identity, were transferred to open-air museums. Here, these dwellings and traditions could live on. In the open-air museum in Bokrijk, the same thing happened. One conserved, treasured and idealized rural heritage which was considered significant of Flanders' identity. Bokrijk would become a living museum, a shrine of Flanders' popular culture. The oldest centre is a museum village of the sandy soils in the Kempen region, with countryside roads, with a Romanesque church from the 12th century, a presbytery with a late Baroque geometric garden for fruit, vegetables and flowers, as well as boxwood, called palm in vernacular after Palm Sunday. An old post house and inn, as well as a pillory where the convicts were exposed, shamed and mocked, and the bench where aldermen administered justice under the Tree of Justice, both references of jurisprudence before the French Revolution. To represent the hilly fertile lands in the south of Limburg, an historical village green has been copied. It is small and densely built with specific farm building structures and techniques, specifically on small parcels, as every square meter of arable land was generating valuable produce. Apart from small and mid-sized farms, there is a large quadrangular farm which was a dependency of nobility or an abbey, a reality of the old feudal system. As for the fertile lowlands of West and East Flanders, buildings were re-erected without settlement pattern. Small farms, monumental barns from the polders, and finally a complete farm from the hop region with barn, drying kiln, baking oven, stables, wagon shed and with a field of hops. However, ideas about identity changed and society started to consider that buildings should be conserved in their original location. As such, Bokrijk started to get a negative connotation. But some buildings are only left to see in Bokrijk, such as this oil press mill or this drying kiln for hops, where hop was dried before being brought to the brewery. Or the small village school with small living chambers for the school mistress, the teaching class with educational prints about religion and geography, and the covered playground with a toilet for two. There is also an urban quarter with mainly reconstructed and completed historical buildings from the city of Antwerp. In the 1960s, city governments and planners removed historic buildings in city centers. The museum became an alibi for further demolition and at the same time a new destination for the buildings. You will find medieval houses with wooden facade and buildings from the Renaissance. Nowadays, historical buildings in historical urban centers are kept on site and renovated, and the systematic deconstruction is not an option anymore. Although, the further development of the city quarter was no longer considered meaningful and was discontinued. For the interior, one opted for a presentation of urban interior design of the 60s. Of interest for the generation of 68, questionable for the younger generation, and much in contrast with the historical exterior. The farms were furnished with household goods and farming equipment. While visiting them, you step into historical spaces, an experience which you do not get when you look at plans or miniature models, thus making the open-air museum experience. This was a well-to-do farm depending from an abbey. The interior showcases the middle of the 18th century, large and spacious, with for the first time an interior with a wardrobe and display cabinet for expensive porcelain. However, most farms were much more modest. People used to live with their animals in adjacent spaces. You would have been welcomed with bread, lard and buttermilk, a daily diet at that time. This farm was the first one rebuilt in Bokrijk. Its interior was redesigned as it looked at the end of the 18th century, which gives you the experience of the daily living environment at that time. All farms reveal cultural backgrounds, what people felt, thought, did and believed to deal with the worries of every day and making living together possible. That is what is behind all we see. In such experiences, one meets oneself, one can see what one has in common with the people from back then, what is different and why, where we have progressed and where we haven't. How can a museum help to understand? By experience, by listening, seeing, smelling and tasting. In this paanhuis, brewery beer is brewed as they did then, in wooden tubs. In a warm and misty atmosphere they mix grain with hops. The wort is captured in mashed up strainers, transferred into a cool ship, where it cools down and clears.
Bier op basis van haver, tarwe en gerstmout. Doorgegist, dus je gaat ook proeven. Je gaat proeven in het bier dat.
In the bakehouse, the farmer's wife bakes bread made from sourdough. Faggots are used to preheat the oven. In the large quadrangular farmstead of Sint-Truiden, you find a traditional farm in operation, with old cow races, Belgian farm horses, pigs, sheep and bees. Doing things together is also part of the Bokrijk experience. Together with the Center for Traditional Games of the University of Louvain, Bokrijk promoted traditional games in every part of Flanders. And they bring people together in a relaxed and low threshold setting. Or you become familiar with the old techniques for making new things. In the section of the south of Limburg, you can not only see but also hear a real-life reenactment of what was happening in village communities in around the year 1913.
Waar is God? God is overal. In de hemel, op de aarde en op alle plaatsen. Allemaal samen, waar is God? God is overal. In de hemel, op de aarde en op alle plaatsen. Heel goed.
Nu donderdag is het vergadering van de Boerenbond. Alle mannen, alle leden dus van de Boerenbond worden op die vergadering verwacht. De mannen moeten ook goed in voor. Die vergadering die gaat niet meer door in de herberg, wel in de school.
Terwijl de hoogmis bezig is, staat die een herberg hier nog open. En dan zijn er mannen die in de herberg pinten aan het pakken zijn tijdens de hoogmis. Champetter, dat kan toch niet?
Nou, ik heb nu geen hele wijn nodig, maar het is goed om te weten dat er plaatsgedacht wordt. Je moet zorgzaam omspringen met uw centen. Wij gaan dat doen, maar op redelijk langere termijn. Zo simpel is dat.
Maar wat, dat is ongelooflijk. De mensen wijs maken die brouwen.
Ja, natuurlijk. Dat.
En de socialisten.
De eerste schepen moet gaan horen met alles. Heeft een beetje het overzicht.
In a monumental barn of the polders near Antwerp, a barn which had to make way for the expansion of the Antwerp harbour, you can hear how the occupants used the historical living spaces.
En dan had je zogezegd de gang van de één deur, die liep helemaal deur. En dan had je daarachter, dat was een chique kamer. Er stond die chique kast en een klokkenkast.
However, historical buildings and objects that we consider as cultural heritage also reveal thought, design and craftsmanship in manufacturing them. In some cultures, such know-how is understood as cultural heritage. For example, in Japan, the Grand Shinto temple in Ise is completely renewed every 20 years. It's a ritual, a tradition, a praxis. In 2016, the shingle roofs of the study and tea house of the Zen Buddhist Shinju-an temple near Kyoto was not technically conserved, but completely re-roofed, following the same tradition while applying traditional craftsmanship. In these cultural environments, the process of making and repair of buildings and objects is cultural heritage. In our cultural environment, one starts to appreciate the immaterial dimension of historic objects, building and settlements, and wants to ensure its preservation. The Bokrijk Open Air Museum and the Museum for All Techniques in Grimbergen document traditional craftsmanship for constructing buildings and making objects, hereby preserving the know-how and ensuring its availability for future generations and promoting a different way of working. It's not only a technical matter, but basically a different attitude. No mass production nor import from China, but a conscious choice for authenticity, quality, creativity, corporate collaboration, pride, using natural materials connected with the natural environment, and, when appropriate, with updated traditional techniques. Artisanal traditions are being continued in on-site new wooden buildings. Bokrijk now invests in the study and development of artisanal craftsmanship. Under the Bokrijk Brand motto, many traditional crafts such as weaving, smithing, leatherworks, etc. are further developed. The continuation and application in other types of crafts is a real challenge today and creates high expectations of what is yet to come. This is how Bokrijk has given cultural heritage a new dynamic and meaning for the development of society today, in addition to focusing on the historical dimension of Flanders' cultural identity, thus complementing the original vision of the pioneers with a new direction and purpose. At the farm's entrances, no pseudo-historical farmers' clothing anymore, but today's fashion inspired by tradition. Bokrijk today, old-fashioned, nostalgic, or fascinating and meaningful?